Why would you sacrifice everything for a man who cannot even afford his own dinner? The question cut through the crowded police station, but Maya Brooks did not look away from Ethan Carter. He stood behind the front desk in a faded shirt, worn jeans, and dusty work boots, his wrists secured in front of him, while two officers reviewed the accusation against him. Outside, his battered yellow Keke sat beside the curb, surrounded by curious neighbors who had followed them from the market. Someone had found a briefcase filled with stolen cash beneath the passenger seat, and every witness had already decided the poor driver was guilty. Maya had not. Her hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. He did not steal that money. A well-dressed businessman standing near the doorway gave a cold laugh. You sold your food stand to hire a lawyer for him. Your mother needs medical care. Your brother may lose his place in school, and you are still defending this man. Maya glanced at Ethan. His face carried no anger, only pain. For 3 months, he had driven her through crowded streets, delivered meals during heavy rain, repaired the broken gate outside her family's small apartment, and stayed beside her mother during a frightening night at the hospital. He had never promised wealth. He had never offered luxury. He had only shown up when everyone else disappeared. I'm defending him because I know his heart, Maya said. The room fell silent. Ethan lowered his eyes. Those words should have comforted him, but they felt like a judgment. Maya believed she knew him. She believed he was a struggling driver with no family, no savings, and no future, except the one they might build together. She had no idea that almost everything he had told her was a lie. One officer reached for the paperwork that would transfer Ethan to county custody. Then the sound of engines rolled through the street. One black SUV stopped outside, then another. Then 5 more. People rushed toward the windows as men and women in tailored suits stepped onto the sidewalk. A gray-haired attorney entered first, followed by Marcus Reed, the one man Ethan had trusted with his secret. Marcus crossed the room without hesitation and placed a leather folder on the desk. "These charges are false," he said. "We have security footage, financial records, and proof of who planted the briefcase." The officer frowned. "And who exactly are you representing?" Marcus turned toward Ethan and lowered his head respectfully. "Mr. Ethan Cole, founder and chief executive of Cole Mobility Group." Maya stopped breathing. The poor Keke driver she had risked everything to save was not poor at all. He was one of the wealthiest men in America. 3 months earlier, Ethan Cole stood alone outside the private dining room of the Belmont Hotel, holding a small velvet box in his hand and believing his life was about to change. The room beyond the door had been decorated with white roses, warm lights, and a table set for 2. He had planned every detail himself. Vanessa Blake believed they were meeting for another business dinner. She did not know Ethan intended to ask her to marry him. For once, he wanted to surprise someone without involving assistants, planners, or photographers. Then he heard Vanessa's voice through the partially open door. "Once he signs the new trust documents, everything becomes easier," she said. Ethan stopped moving. Another voice answered, low and familiar. It belonged to Richard Hayes, the senior executive Ethan trusted with nearly every major decision at Cole Mobility Group. "Marriage alone does not guarantee control," Richard replied. "You need him emotionally dependent on you. Then he will sign whatever you place in front of him." Vanessa laughed softly. "Ethan is already lonely. Men like him confuse attention with love." The velvet box suddenly felt heavy in Ethan's palm. He listened as Vanessa described the mansion she wanted, the board position she expected, and the life she planned to build with his money. Not with him, with his money. Richard assured her that once the documents were signed, Ethan's voting power could be weakened, without him understanding the full consequences. Ethan quietly stepped away before either of them noticed him. He returned to the penthouse without entering the dining room, The roses remained untouched. The dinner grew cold. Hours later, Vanessa arrived at his home wearing the smile he had once believed. Ethan did not accuse her. He needed to know how quickly that smile would disappear. "There is a problem with the company," he said. Vanessa's expression shifted. Ethan continued carefully. "We may lose several contracts. My personal assets could be frozen while the board investigates." The room became silent. Vanessa stared at him, as if he had become a stranger. "How serious is it?" she asked. "Serious enough that I may lose almost everything." Her hand slowly moved away from his. She did not ask whether he was afraid. She did not ask how she could help. She only asked what would happen to the wedding, the penthouse, and the accounts he had promised to combine after marriage. By midnight, her suitcase was gone. Ethan stood beside the window, watching her car disappear into the city. Marcus Reed entered quietly and found the velvet box on the table. "She failed you," Marcus said. Ethan closed his eyes. "No, I failed myself by believing her." Then he turned toward Marcus with a decision already forming. "Find me a small apartment, an old Keke, and clothes no one would connect to Ethan Cole." Marcus stared at him. "What are you planning?" Ethan looked at the empty room Vanessa had left behind. "I'm going to find out whether anyone can love me when they believe I have nothing." He did not know that Richard had returned to the hotel hallway before Ethan left and had heard every word. By sunrise, Ethan Cole had disappeared from the life everyone recognized. The tailored suits were gone. The private driver was gone. The watch worth more than most houses rested inside a locked drawer in Marcus Reed's office. In their place were faded jeans, a plain gray shirt, worn work boots, and a small wallet holding only enough cash to survive for a few days. Marcus drove him to a neighborhood nearly 20 miles from the downtown towers where Ethan usually worked. The streets were crowded, the buildings older, and the sidewalks lined with food carts, repair shops, and people rushing toward early shifts. Parked beside a narrow apartment building was a yellow three-wheeled Keke with scratched paint, a cracked mirror, and an engine that coughed every time Marcus turned the key. Ethan stared at it. "This is what you asked for," Marcus said. Ethan placed one hand on the handlebar. "From now on, my name is Ethan Carter." Marcus did not smile. "You are not only hiding your money, you are asking strangers to believe a lie." Ethan looked away. "I need to know whether someone can care about me without the money." Marcus studied him carefully. "Then remember this. Even a test can hurt an innocent person." Ethan ignored the warning and moved into a small second-floor apartment with one bedroom, a noisy ceiling fan, and a kitchen barely wide enough for one person. That afternoon, he drove the Keke for the first time. He had studied the controls, but studying was different from surviving in traffic. Cars pressed around him. Horns sounded from every direction. Passengers complained that he was too slow, then refused to pay the full fare. One businessman stepped out, looked at Ethan's clothes, and tossed several crumpled bills onto the seat without meeting his eyes. Later, a woman carrying shopping bags waved him away after seeing the cracked mirror. "I'm not riding in that thing," she said. By evening, Ethan's shirt clung to his back, his hands ached, and he had earned less than he once spent on lunch. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be judged before speaking. Still, the day was not over. Near a crowded market, a young boy ran into the street after a rolling soccer ball. Ethan turned sharply to avoid him. The Keke missed the child, but the side wheel struck a wooden food cart. Containers tipped. Paper plates scattered. A metal pot slid across the pavement as customers jumped back in surprise. Ethan stopped immediately and hurried toward the damage. Behind the broken cart stood a young black woman with tired eyes, a flour-stained apron, and an expression that made the entire crowd fall silent. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "I will pay for everything." She looked at the bent wheel, the spilled food, and then at his nearly empty wallet. "With what money?" she asked. Ethan had no answer. Someone in the crowd whispered that she should call the police. Another person said the careless driver had destroyed her whole day. The woman picked up a long wooden spoon from the ground and walked directly toward Ethan. He expected anger. Instead, she placed the spoon in his hand. "If you cannot pay," she said, "then help me rebuild before the evening rush." Ethan stared at her. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No fear, no flattery, no interest in who he might be. Only honesty. Her name was Maya Brooks, and within minutes, the billionaire was kneeling beside a broken food cart, unaware that this ordinary moment would change both of their lives. Maya did not wait for Ethan to recover from his surprise. She turned toward the damaged cart, lifted one side of the bent frame, and nodded toward the other. "Are you helping or staring?" Ethan moved immediately. Together, they pushed the cart away from the traffic and onto the sidewalk. The front wheel had twisted beneath the wooden base, several containers had opened, and nearly half of Maya's lunch food had spilled across the pavement. Ethan expected shouting. Instead, she began sorting what could still be saved. "You are unusually calm," he said. Maya gave him a brief look. "Being angry does not repair a wheel." Her answer stayed with him. In Ethan's world, people raised their voices over delayed meetings and imperfect coffee. Maya had just lost most of a day's income, yet she focused on the problem in front of her. Ethan removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and examined the axle. The repair was simple enough, but he could not reveal how familiar he was with transportation design. Coal mobility had started with commercial vehicles before expanding into national transit systems. "Do you know what you are doing?" Maya asked. "A little," Ethan replied. It was another incomplete truth. For the next hour, they worked beneath the afternoon sun. Ethan straightened the bracket with borrowed tools, while Maya cleaned the cart and prepared another pot of rice from the supplies she had stored nearby. Customers slowly returned. Some laughed at the sight of the new driver working like an unpaid assistant, but Maya ignored them. When the cart was ready, she handed Ethan a plate filled with rice, vegetables, and grilled chicken. "I cannot pay for this," he said. "You already did," she replied. "You gave me your time." Ethan stared at the food. No one had ever measured his value in time rather than money. Before he could answer, a teenage boy arrived carrying a backpack with a broken strap. "Maya, the school called again," he said quietly. Her expression changed. "About the tuition?" The boy nodded. Maya introduced him as her younger brother, Noah. She promised they would solve it, but Ethan noticed the concern she tried to hide. Moments later, Maya's phone rang. Her mother's clinic needed payment before releasing a new prescription. Maya closed her eyes for 1 second, then returned to serving customers as if nothing had happened. Ethan reached instinctively for the emergency credit card hidden inside his wallet, but stopped. Offering thousands of dollars would expose him. Worse, it might turn their first meeting into a transaction. "You handle all of this alone?" he asked. Maya looked at him firmly. "I handle what belongs to me." There was no request for rescue in her voice, only dignity. As evening approached, Ethan offered to deliver the remaining food with his Keke so she could reach more customers before closing. Maya hesitated, then agreed. They drove through the neighborhood together, delivering meals to office workers, mechanics, and elderly residents who greeted her by name. By the time the last container was empty, Maya had earned enough to replace part of what she lost. At her apartment building, she handed Ethan 2 folded bills. "Your share." He refused. She pushed the money back toward him. "I do not accept free labor, and I do not give charity to men who can work." Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. As Maya walked toward the entrance, he called after her. "Can I help again tomorrow?" She turned, studying him carefully. "Only if you arrive before sunrise." Ethan agreed, unaware that Maya had already begun to wonder why a struggling Keke driver spoke like a man who had spent his life giving orders. Ethan arrived before sunrise the next morning, but Maya was already arranging containers on the repaired cart. She looked at the time on her phone, then at him. 2 minutes early, she said. That is better than yesterday. Ethan smiled and began loading the Keke without being asked. Over the next several days, a quiet routine formed between them. Maya cooked while Ethan delivered breakfast to construction crews, office buildings, and repair shops across the neighborhood. At first, customers complained about his slow turns and uncertain routes. Then they began asking for him by name because he waited for elderly passengers, carried heavy bags without charging extra, and never left anyone standing in the rain. Each evening, he returned to Maya's cart with fewer meals and more stories. She laughed when he described a little girl who had paid her fare with 3 coins and a drawing of the Keke. Ethan had forgotten how much a simple laugh could warm a room. One afternoon, the engine stopped nearly 4 miles from Maya's apartment. Dark clouds gathered overhead as Ethan lifted the rear panel and studied the problem. "I thought you knew a little about vehicles," Maya said, holding an umbrella above them. "I said a little," he replied. She noticed how quickly his hands found the damaged connection. "That looks like more than a little." Ethan paused, then said he had once worked around transportation equipment. It was not entirely false, but the lie still tightened inside his chest. Rain began falling before they finished. Maya held the flashlight while Ethan repaired the wire, and both of them laughed when the engine finally started with a loud cough. They sat inside the Keke until the rain softened, sharing 2 containers of food that had not been delivered. Maya told him about her father, who had died when Noah was young, and how every responsibility had become hers overnight. "What about your family?" she asked. Ethan looked through the rain-covered windshield. He could have told her the truth. He could have said his parents were alive, that his mother lived in a gated estate, and that his father's name still appeared on buildings across the country. Instead, he said, "They are gone. I do not have anyone." Maya's expression softened. "Then you understand what it feels like to keep moving because stopping would hurt too much." Ethan nodded, but shame followed him all the way home. Days became weeks. He helped Noah prepare for a scholarship exam and quietly repaired the leaking sink in Grace Brooks's kitchen. Grace watched him carefully. She liked his manners, but she noticed details Maya overlooked. He knew how to read medical forms, negotiate with clinic staff, and speak with the confidence of a man accustomed to being heard. One evening, Grace asked him directly, "Who were you before you became a driver?" Ethan answered with a smile that revealed nothing. The next morning, Marcus called from a private number. Richard had delayed 3 major contracts and begun telling board members that Ethan was emotionally unstable. Marcus urged him to return. Ethan looked across the street at Maya serving a customer, sunlight touching her face as she smiled. "Give me 1 more week," he said. That night, Maya sat beside him on the apartment steps and admitted she was beginning to trust him. "I do not care if you never become rich," she said. "I only care that you remain honest." Ethan's heart sank. He decided he would tell her everything the next day. But when Maya opened her cart the following morning, Vanessa Blake was already waiting for her. Vanessa stood beside Maya's cart in a cream-colored suit that looked untouched by the dust around her. Her polished car waited at the curb with the engine running. Maya recognized wealth immediately, but she did not recognize the woman. "Can I help you?" Maya asked. Vanessa looked over the food containers, the repaired wheel, and the handwritten menu. "I'm looking for Ethan Carter." Maya's hands paused. "Why?" Vanessa smiled without warmth. Because Ethan Carter doesn't exist. The words settled heavily between them. Before Maya could respond, Ethan turned the corner carrying a box of supplies. He stopped the moment he saw Vanessa. His face changed so quickly that Maya noticed. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Vanessa glanced at Maya. "I came to warn her." Ethan set down the box. "Leave her out of this." Maya stepped forward. "No, I want to hear what she has to say." Vanessa explained that Ethan had once lived with wealthy women, borrowed money, and disappeared when they began asking questions. She claimed he had used different names in different cities and suggested Maya was only his latest target. Every sentence was carefully designed to sound believable. Vanessa never mentioned coal mobility. She never mentioned the penthouse. She never said the word billionaire. Ethan knew why. She wanted Maya suspicious, but she wanted his identity hidden until Richard finished taking control of the company. "Is any of that true?" Maya asked. Ethan looked at her and felt the confession rise inside him. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Marcus appeared on the screen. Richard's men were watching. Maya and her family could be used against him if his identity became public before the evidence was secured. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. "I have made mistakes," he said, "but I have never used you." Maya's eyes searched his face. "Were you honest about your family?" Ethan could not answer immediately. That silence wounded her more than Vanessa's accusations. "Tell her who you really are," Vanessa said. Ethan stared at Vanessa, understanding the trap. If he confessed, Richard would know the disguise was over. If he stayed silent, Maya might walk away. "My feelings for you are real," Ethan said. Maya stepped back. "That was not my question." Vanessa gave a satisfied smile and returned to her car. Ethan tried to follow Maya, but she lifted one hand. "I need time." That evening, Ethan waited outside the Brooks apartment for nearly an hour. When Maya finally came downstairs, she carried a small container of food. "I do not know what you are hiding," she said, placing it in his hands. "But I know what I have seen. You helped my mother. You encouraged Noah. You worked beside me when you could have disappeared." Ethan felt hope return. "You believe me?" Maya looked directly at him. "I believe your heart. Do not make me regret it." She walked back inside before he could speak. Across the street, a dark sedan remained parked beneath a broken streetlight. Richard sat in the back seat, watching Ethan through the tinted window. "She chose him," Richard said quietly. The man beside him opened a leather briefcase filled with cash. Richard looked toward Ethan's Keke. "Then tomorrow, we give her a reason to believe Vanessa was right." The next morning began like any other, which made the trap more dangerous. Ethan arrived before sunrise, helped Maya load the food containers, and promised he would finally explain everything after the lunch rush. Maya studied his face for a long moment. "No more half-truths," she said. Ethan nodded. "No more." For the first time in weeks, he meant it completely. By 10 o'clock, the streets were crowded and business was steady. Ethan carried meals across town, while Maya served customers beside the cart. Near noon, a well-dressed man flagged down the Keke and asked Ethan to deliver a sealed envelope to an office building 5 blocks away. The passenger spoke quickly, paid in cash, and stepped out before Ethan could ask questions. Ethan completed the delivery and returned to Maya less than 20 minutes later. He never noticed the second man who had opened the rear compartment while the Keke was parked near the loading entrance. He never saw the leather briefcase slide beneath the passenger seat. Minutes later, 2 police cars stopped beside Maya's cart. Customers turned. Conversations died. One officer asked Ethan to step away from the Keke while another searched the vehicle. Maya moved closer, confusion spreading across her face. "What is this about?" she asked. The officer lifted the briefcase and opened it on the hood of the nearest car. Bundles of cash filled the inside. The crowd reacted at once. A restaurant owner claimed the money-matched funds reported missing from a nearby office. Another witness said Ethan had been seen near the building. Richard's plan was working perfectly. "That is not mine," Ethan said. One officer asked whether anyone else had access to the vehicle. Ethan looked around, but the passenger was gone. The people who had praised his kindness only days earlier began whispering that Vanessa must have been telling the truth. Maya stood frozen. Ethan saw the doubt return to her eyes and felt something inside him collapse. Then she stepped between him and the crowd. "He did not take that money," she said. The officer explained that Ethan would need to come with them while the evidence was reviewed. Maya followed them to the station without closing her food cart. By afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood. Customers stopped coming. The landlord threatened to remove the cart from the sidewalk. Grace's clinic called again about the unpaid prescription, and Noah received notice that his tuition deadline had passed. Then Daniel Foster, a wealthy developer who had pursued Maya for months, arrived at the station. He offered to pay for Grace's care, Noah's tuition, and a lawyer for Ethan. There was only one condition. Maya had to publicly say she no longer trusted Ethan and walk away from him. "You are ruining your family for a man who cannot save himself," Daniel said. Maya looked through the glass partition at Ethan sitting alone. She remembered the rain, the broken cart, the repaired sink, and every quiet promise he had kept. "No," she said. Daniel's expression hardened. "Then you will lose everything." Maya returned to the neighborhood, sold the food cart to a nearby vendor, and used the money to hire an attorney. When she came back to the station, Ethan saw the receipt in her hand and understood what she had sacrificed. His test was over. It had gone too far. He called Marcus and spoke with a calm voice that hid his shame. "Bring the legal team, bring the evidence, and bring the cars." Marcus hesitated. "Are you sure?" Ethan looked at Maya, the woman who had just given up her only source of income for a man she believed was poor. "Yes," he said. "End the disguise." Outside, the first black SUV turned onto the street. The first black SUV stopped outside the station, followed by another, then another, until the entire street fell silent. Men and women in dark suits stepped onto the sidewalk with leather folders, security badges, and the calm confidence of people who expected doors to open. Marcus Reed entered first. He walked directly to the front desk, placed a file in front of the officer, and said, "These charges are false. The money was planted and we have video evidence proving it." The officer looked from Marcus to Ethan. "Who exactly are you representing?" Marcus turned toward the man in the faded shirt and worn work boots. His voice was clear enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Ethan Cole, founder and chief executive of Cole Mobility Group." Maya stopped breathing. The name was impossible to misunderstand. Ethan Cole appeared in business magazines, television interviews, and advertisements across the country. His company controlled transportation contracts worth billions of dollars. Yet the man standing before her was the same driver who had eaten leftover rice beside her cart, repaired her mother's sink, and claimed he had no family. One officer removed the restraints while Marcus presented security footage from the office building. The video showed a man opening the rear compartment of Ethan's Keke and placing the briefcase inside. Financial records connected the man to Richard Hayes. Additional messages revealed that Vanessa Blake had helped Richard track Ethan's movements. The evidence cleared Ethan within minutes. The room filled with apologies, but Ethan heard none of them. He only watched Maya. "You are Ethan Cole," she whispered. He stepped toward her. "Maya, I can explain." She looked past him at the luxury vehicles outside, then at the legal team waiting for his instructions. "You said your family was gone." Ethan lowered his voice. I was afraid the truth would put you in danger. You lied before there was danger." Her words struck deeper because they were true. Ethan told her about Vanessa, the betrayal, and his decision to live without wealth so he could find someone honest. Maya listened without interrupting. Her face remained still, but her eyes filled with hurt. "So I was a test," she said. "No. What I feel for you is real." "Was any part of us real?" Ethan answered immediately. "Every part." Maya shook her head. "Then why was the truth the only thing you never gave me?" The station fell quiet again. Marcus looked away. Even the officers stopped moving. Ethan reached for Maya's hand, but she stepped back. "I sold my cart for you," she said. "I defended you when everyone called you a thief. I trusted you when your own words gave me reasons not to. I never wanted you to lose anything. That is the problem. You believed you could control the risk because you had money waiting behind the curtain." Ethan had no answer. Maya placed the receipt from the cart sale on the desk between them. "You found what you were looking for. Now you know I loved you when I thought you had nothing." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "And now I know you never trusted me enough to love me with the truth." She turned and walked out of the station. Ethan could have called her back. He could have offered to replace the cart, pay every bill, and solve every problem before sunset. Instead, he stood surrounded by wealth and power, feeling poorer than he had ever felt in his life. For the first time in his life, Ethan did not chase after what he wanted. He returned to Cole Mobility Group, removed Richard Hayes from every position of authority, and gave investigators the messages, financial records, and surveillance footage that exposed the entire scheme. Vanessa lost the influence she had tried to steal, and Richard faced the consequences of his own choices. But none of it brought Maya back. Ethan sent no diamonds, no luxury car, and no oversized check. He understood that money had already damaged enough. Instead, he began repairing what his deception had cost. He repurchased Maya's food cart from the vendor who had bought it, restored it completely, and placed ownership in Maya's name without asking for anything in return. He paid Grace's clinic balance through an anonymous community medical fund and expanded that fund to serve families across the neighborhood. He created a scholarship program for students like Noah and a protection plan for Keke drivers who lost income because of illness, accidents, or unfair treatment. Then Ethan did something that surprised everyone at his company. Every morning before work, he drove the same yellow Keke back to Maya's neighborhood. He delivered meals, repaired equipment, and helped elderly residents reach appointments. He did not wear faded clothes anymore, and he did not pretend to be poor. He arrived as Ethan Cole with no disguise and no excuses. Maya saw him often, but for weeks she said little. Trust returned slowly, not through promises, but through consistency. 3 months later, Cole Mobility opened its first driver support center less than 2 miles from Maya's apartment. Hundreds of local drivers attended the ceremony. Ethan stood on a small stage beside the restored Keke, while reporters waited for a grand announcement. Instead, he looked directly at Maya. "I disguised myself because I was afraid people would use me," he said. "But I became the one who used another person's trust. Maya loved me when she believed I had nothing, and I repaid that love with a lie. Everything I have built means nothing if I cannot admit when I am wrong." Silence spread through the crowd. Ethan stepped away from the microphone. He did not propose. He did not ask Maya to forgive him in public. He simply placed the Keke key on the table and said, "I am done testing people. From now on, I will only offer the truth." Maya walked toward the stage. Every face turned to her. She picked up the key, studied it for a moment, and placed it back in Ethan's hand. "Then we begin again," she said softly. "No secrets, no tests, no pretending." Ethan's eyes filled with relief. Months later, they drove through the city together, in that same restored Keke, not as a billionaire and a poor woman, but as two people who had finally learned that true love cannot be measured by sacrifice alone. It must also be protected by honesty,